Please welcome Skip Weisman.
So imagine you're 26 years old, and in looking around the room, that will be easier for some of you than others. But imagine you're 26 years old, and you've just been promoted to the job of your dreams. A job you've coveted for several years, and now the job is yours. And just like every other 26-year-old in your company, you think you're ready to run the company. That was the position I found myself in at 26 when I was named Vice President, General Manager, and CEO of my first professional baseball team. And I thought I was ready. And then, shortly after sitting in that CEO chair, I realized I still had some learning to do, and the job was going to come with some growing pains. Not long after those growing pains came to a head, one day I was sitting at my stadium office minding my own business when suddenly from down the hallway I heard two loud voices. I could tell two employees were beginning to have, let's call it a spirited discussion. It quickly escalated, and as I sat there, the voices got louder, and the voices got louder, and the voices got even louder, to the point where I could no longer avoid what I was hearing. I was the person most responsible for the behavior and the performance of those employees, the person most responsible for the work environment that we all worked within. Yet I was glued to my chair. In that moment, I made a decision. And I did what most organizational leaders and project managers would do. Nothing. I sat there wishing and hoping it would all just go away. Have you ever been there? So I knew I had to do something, but I was still glued to my chair because I suffered from a certain affliction back then that you may be familiar with. It's called CAPD. CAPD. Has anybody heard of CAPD? No. What about COPD? You've heard of COPD? Of course, because there's a pharmaceutical commercial every 30 seconds on TV, right? There's no pharmaceutical yet for CAPD. And when I tell you what it is, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. CAPD stands for Confrontation Avoidant Personality Disorder. Yeah. Raise your hand if you know somebody with CAPD. Keep your hand in the air if that person is you. So imagine with CAPD, I pushed myself away from my desk with a lot of anxiety and tremendous trepidation. I hustled down the hallway to see what's going on, and I stepped between these two people just before the first punch was thrown. It was that serious. Separated them, sent them to neutral offices, and I was forced to finally deal with something I had been avoiding for months. 5 months. Well, when it was all said and done, there was some good news, some bad news, and some really bad news. Good news, no one was physically hurt. Bad news, we lost 2 very good, dedicated employees, and that came with significant cost to our organization. The really bad news, one of those 2 people involved was my wife. 18 months later, we were divorced. Now, to her credit, she was trying to do the right thing. She was our director of business operations. We worked together, my bad, lessons learned. And she thought this employee was taking advantage of me, and I wasn't dealing with it. I was avoiding it. So she stepped up for me and stepped in for me for a confrontation I should have been having, and it didn't go well. So in the dissolution of that relationship, I learned an awful lot. We went through couples counseling, and I went through individual counseling, and then I did some real self-reflection, and I realized that the ultimate cause of that incident and many other incidents up to that point were a result of my poor leadership and personal communication. So I got an executive coach. I went through a leadership development program for 2 years, going to a retreat for a week-long retreat about every 3 months for 2 years. And that's where I learned to communicate as a much more effective leader. And what I learned about myself was this pattern of communication that we're going to talk about today, the 7 Deadliest Communication Sins. And I also learned how to overcome them and build higher level communication, what I call communication power. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And what you're going to learn is the 7 deadliest communication sins that cause most of your problems. We'll talk a little bit about the 7 critical communication skills that overcome them, and give you some tips, tools, and techniques you can use as soon as you walk out that door today to become a more powerful communicator. If we can do that over the next 55 minutes or so, will that be a valuable use of your morning? Yes. Outstanding. Okay, so let's dive into this. But I need some input and feedback from you guys. So in a moment, we're going to have a little conversation at your table about some of your communication challenges. But before then, I have to discuss something else with you, because out in the hallway just 10 minutes ago, I had this conversation that always comes up. And you heard Stephen introduce me, saying I spent 20 years in professional baseball. And people, usually when they hear that, they have a question that comes to mind, and they always ask me, and it just happened out there again, so I have to get this out there because I know it may be distracting you. The conversation goes like this. So Skip, that's really great. You spent 20 years in professional baseball. What teams did you play for? I wasn't an athlete. I didn't play. Oh, then you must have been a coach or a manager. What teams were you with? No, I wasn't a coach or manager. Well, what did you do for 20 years in baseball then? I said, my job was to put butts in seats, keep the beer cold, and keep the bathrooms clean. And that's much more important. Much more financially lucrative, too, as you might imagine. That was my job, to put butts in seats, keep the beer cold, and keep the bathrooms clean. And it was very rewarding. It's the only thing I ever wanted to do was to be involved in professional sports. When I knew I couldn't be an athlete, I got into management. So that's what I did. Wasn't a ball player. But that's okay, because I had much more fun. I had a much longer career. So I wanted to get that out of the way. So now you know what I did and why it really relates to this, because I wouldn't be here speaking to you about collaboration, innovation, and communication if I was a ball player. So this is the stadium, the last stadium I was with in the Hudson Valley region of New York. And when you talk about collaboration and innovation and communication, this ballpark, because of certain political manifestations, was built in 71 days. Imagine being on a construction project for a 4,500-seat minor league baseball stadium that from first shovel in the ground to opening day was 71 days. Now, to be honest, it wasn't 100% complete, about 70% complete, but we were able to open and host 4,500 people on opening night. Imagine the collaboration it took. The innovation was old school innovation, though. 3 shifts, all overnight for 3 weeks. We didn't exactly make the budget, as you might imagine. So that's the last stadium I worked within. So when you think about collaboration and innovation on your project teams, there's probably some things that get in the way regarding communication. So I want to give you just a few minutes now, maybe just one quick minute, to turn to a neighbor, turn to somebody at your table, and answer this question. What communication issues, frustrations, challenges kill collaboration and innovation in the work that you do as a project manager? Now, raise your hand if you've come with a colleague or a coworker or something. You're sitting next to somebody you know. Okay. When you turn to that person to have a conversation, if they're the cause of that problem, find somebody else. We don't want any conflicts, okay? You have 1 minute, go. All right, let's bring it back. If you can hear my voice, clap once. All right, so I'd like to hear from some folks as to what you talked about, as this guy just keeps getting more and more upset as we go along. We have two mic runners, David and Aparma, right? David's over there, Aparma's over here. And then we got a little ethical bribe for you. They have a little gift for you if you share. Let's hear what some of your communication challenges are that kill collaboration and innovation. Starting on this side of the table, and of course, it's as far away from David as you could possibly be.
Lack of leadership.
Lack of leadership. How does that equate to a communication issue?
Well, I think it breaks down collaboration, mostly because if you don't have somebody who's leading a group, then we don't have the ability to move things forward.
Right. And so how would you define the actual communication issue? Because that's kind of a general statement. How would you know it's not happening? What's the communication issue that's not happening? Specifically, communication. Hard question to answer.
It is a hard question to answer, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing. Give him a little prize. We're going to talk about your exact situation in just a moment. This gentleman right here who wants to grab him, Aparma.
Unclear expectations about what you're going to be talking about how you're going to be working as a team.
Unclear expectations. That's it. Anybody else face that problem? All right. This is going to be like Family Feud. Every time somebody gives an answer, you're going to start hearing a rumbling. Ooh, good answer, good answer, good answer. All right. Somebody else? Aparma, pick somebody. It's hard for me. We'll go to you next.
I think that we start from a position of, as we summarize together, a position of asserting ourselves in a conversation instead of coming with the spirit of listening and understanding.
Oh, good answer. Give him a hand. Yes. Seek first to understand, right? Stephen Covey's fifth habit, I think it is. Let's go back to this side. David, on your side of the room, what do you got?
Defensive positioning, creating an environment where everybody is suddenly on the defense because of the way the communication starts. It lifts all the walls, it creates a collaborative environment, and
Right.
basically shuts down the conversation.
Can you give an example of what type of communication would do that?
So something that would feel threatening to other people in the conversation, something that may feel accusatory,
Yeah.
something that's going to either intrude on somebody's turf or force them into a situation intellectually to
Right.
become defensive, and they stop collaborating.
Make them feel threatened. Outstanding. Okay, everybody else face that? Good job. Okay. Over here on Aparma's side, this gentleman down here has had his hand up for a while.
Geographic separation of the team members. So
Oh.
very little time to overlap and actually have meetings. We're able to read body language. We are multitasking in the background.
Oh, multitasking. Yeah, that never happens. Who else deals with multitasking when you're trying to have a conversation with somebody? Yes, give him a hand. Good job. All right, let's do one more on David's side. Pick somebody. You got the mic. You're in control.
Culture.
Elaborate, please. Culture doesn't mean anything to me.
Dealing with overseas teams from another country.
Oh, actual
Deal with culture.
actual cultures, different cultures of communication and things like that across the globe, right? That's huge. That's not my specialty, so we're not going to talk about that today. Although we will in a certain context, we will, and that's about gaining clarity and all. But that's a huge issue. And one more from Aparma's side. Over there in the back. Yes, get a female.
When people come into a meeting with preconceived ideas about what the solution is, particularly if you've got more than one of those people, there's no real room for collaboration or innovation.
Yeah, so if people are coming in with preconceived notions of where it's going to go and how they're going to direct things, and they're not, again, open to listening, where we heard. All right, give everybody a hand. Thank you for sharing. So these are common themes that you're all feeling, and that's, there's only so many issues we all face. We may couch them or define them in certain ways, but it's really all the same half a dozen stuff. So we're going to talk about the 7 deadliest communication sins, but first we have to talk about the 3 ingredients for collaboration and innovation that must take place, and most of what you just talked about undermines these 3 things. First, obviously, you need communication. Communication. what type of communication? Communication gets blamed for everything, doesn't it? There's one big rug that just has communication on it, and we just sweep everything under communication rug, right? And it never gets any better because that rug just accepts it all. It just goes into a black hole, doesn't it, under that rug? And we never fix it. But the second thing that the communication has to do, it has to lead to connection. John Maxwell, the great leadership guru, talks about there's all sorts of communication going on, but there's little connection happening, right? And so we really need to make sure our communication is connecting with people. And when you connect with people, it leads to the third ingredient, which is trust. Right? You can't collaborate and create any innovative work environment unless you are in a trusting relationship with the person. And so these three things have to occur. And I'm wondering, is your communication doing that? Right? And who's responsible for this, and how can we influence the conversation so it does include these three ingredients? Are you familiar with the book, The Speed of Trust? Who's read The Speed of Trust? There's always a few folks. Great book, highly recommended if you get a chance to get it, do so. Stephen M.R. Covey, the son of the great Stephen Covey, who wrote The 7 Habits, wrote The Speed of Trust. And based on his research, what he says is that as trust goes down, speed goes down, and costs go up, which I've heard in my speeches to other project management groups that dynamic in project management is somewhat important, right, around the triple aims. And conversely, as trust goes up, speed goes up, and costs go down, which is what we're really looking for. So our communication needs to work to move in this direction of creating trust. But there's a challenge with all communication that will be helpful for you to understand. Because there's only three outcomes that can possibly occur from any communication that you might engage in. The first is it's building trust. It's building the relationship. It's making that connection and building that relationship. That's where we want to be, right? That's what we all want to be. We want to be communicating in that way. The second outcome is it's slowly eroding trust and the relationship. And the third, it's instantly destroying trust and the relationship. What do you notice about this diagram and the three potential outcomes from any communication? The odds are not in your favor. There is a 67% risk every time you communicate of damaging the relationship. Kind of makes you somewhat apprehensive, right, to communicate. And maybe you may want to hold back from communicating because you want to get it couched just right, and so we put it off and we procrastinate, and yet that doesn't work either because that got me in a whole lot of trouble. Right? So the real important question for you to answer for yourself is, are you consciously communicating to build connection and trust? Is it something that's part of your habits of communicating? Because what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the 7 biggest communication mistakes, communication sins, that are undermining that possibility. Number 1, communication sin number 1. I was at a networking event, much like this, in our local community. It was our Chamber of Commerce event. And a woman comes up to me who I knew from the community. She was a regional bank branch manager. And she says, Skip, I'd love to introduce you to my boss because I think your communication work could help us. Can I introduce you to Joe, my boss? I said, absolutely. So on Tuesday afternoon, she does one of those joint introductory emails to both of us. On Thursday afternoon, we receive an email back from Joe, and it reads, I'd be happy to speak with Skip. Have him call me anytime. I was pretty excited about this new opportunity. I emailed Joe back. Joe, thank you for your interest in my work. How is Friday at 10 a.m. or Monday at 2 p.m. to speak? He emails me back within an hour. Says, no, Skip, please call me late Tuesday afternoon. I'm taking Friday and Monday off. Are you thinking what I'm thinking in this moment? I begin to type an email. Joe, what happened to any time? I didn't send that email. Have you ever gotten an email that sort of got your emotions going and you wanted to fire off something snippy back to somebody? Have you ever hit send? Who's hit send on that? Didn't go very well, did it? I didn't send it. Would not have been a good way to start the relationship, right? So I say, great, thank you. I'll call you 4 o'clock Tuesday. And I get another email back. No, please call me after 5. That's when I'll have time to speak with you in my car on the way home. I go back to that email. Joe, what happened to anytime? Didn't hit send there either. So I get to Tuesday afternoon, 5:06, 5:07. I give them a few minutes to get in the car, and I call, and guess what I get? Voicemail. How infuriating is that? Communication sin number 1, the word that Joe used was anytime, which is rather non-specific. Would you agree? The number 1 communication sin that is killing your ability to connect and build trust with people and collaborate is called a lack of specificity. This is an epidemic, and it's not a malicious thing usually. It's just lazy communication habits. Right? We fall into these patterns of communication anytime, the all-time hit parade, as soon as possible, or ASAP, or sometime next week, or you're dealing with a global thing, close of business or end of day. If you're dealing with somebody in Asia, when's the end of the day, right? Have you ever been in the right place but at the wrong time? Or conversely, right? Clarity helps collaboration. Specificity leads to clarity. Right? Think about all the ways that there's a lack of specificity. Most times it's not malicious. Yet I wonder how many of you are also non-specific on purpose. Will anybody admit to being non-specific on purpose? Because you may not want to be held to a deadline that you're not comfortable you can meet, right? So how do you respond in that way? How do you kind of leave it sort of open-ended? So you got some wiggle room, right? You get somebody here, there, and a lot of heads nodding, right? Is that a standard we should be living up to? Begin to be more specific, make more commitments. I'm assuming this project management world, especially from an employment and job perspective, is somewhat competitive. And we need to set a higher standard for ourselves if we want to stand out. And this is an easy way to do it. And if you set that commitment, that'll raise the standard for not just the people around you, but for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I challenge you to begin speaking in more specific terms and making that commitment and holding yourself to a little higher standard. Okay? If you commit to greater specificity in your own world of communicating and you make it sort of an expectation on your project teams, productivity will increase 50% overnight. That's how big of an epidemic lack of specificity is. Number 2. This was one of the ones that got into my problem with my opening story. 5 months I delayed dealing with this issue. And so we call this a lack of immediacy, urgency, and promptness. That's fancy language for project managers speak because people don't like to hear communication procrastination. But that's what it is. It's communication procrastination. Raise your hand if you are in a place right now where you know you have to have a conversation with somebody that you've been putting off. Anybody? Yeah, about 10% of the audience, and everybody else is procrastinating on answering the question. Okay. There's 3 levels to this communication procrastination. You have to decide how it's a problem for you. 1, it's a distraction. Not a big deal. Just distracts you. It saps some of your energy, some of your thoughts, some of your focus. Sort of like, the laundry is like packing, stacking up. The dishes in the sink are stacking up. It's a distraction. At some point, though, it may get debilitating, right? I'm out of underwear. Got to do laundry, right? So it starts impacting. Some connections start misconnecting, or people start wondering and waiting and chasing, asking for stuff that's not getting done. You probably experienced that, right? Wouldn't you like some people on your project teams to have a little greater sense of urgency when they're communicating? Wouldn't We need to set that standard as well. The third level is it's destructive. Like in my opening story, it was pretty destructive, right? So how is this communication habit for you? What's holding you back from communicating? Most people tell me it's some type of fear. It's going to be a difficult conversation. I'm afraid of the response, all that stuff. So if that's a challenge for you, we need to develop communication power skills to get over this. Would you agree? Because it's not helpful. That's communication sin number 2. How many people will admit that they have somewhat of an issue in some areas in their life with procrastination? Anybody? Yeah. So it's not helpful. Some places it doesn't matter, it's just a distraction. Some places it's debilitating and destructive. Would you agree? Okay. So you got to figure this out for yourself where you're at. Communication sin number 3. 3. There we go. The elephants in the room. Does anybody see an elephant in this room? It's a big room. What are the conversations that are not being had? So this plays off of the communication one. What are the conversations people were avoiding? Right? Lack of directness and candor is number 3. These are the conversations that we're wishy-washy about. We beat around the bush. How many knows? How many of you know somebody that's sort of wishy-washy, beats around the bush, never tells it like it is, and people don't know where they stand, and it's like a guessing game, right? Have you ever had a conversation with somebody like in a performance management role where you just didn't get the straight scoop? Or you were afraid to deliver the straight scoop, and you kind of dance around it and hope that they get it? Have you ever been on a project team where, let's say there's 10, 12 people on it, and there's one person who just is the one who's gumming up the works, dropping the ball, not following through, not getting back to people? Have you ever been in a situation like that? And then this next step is, do you ever have the team leader, the project leader, call a project team meeting and talk about how we have to help each other as a team and serve each other and follow through and make sure we're meeting our deadlines and commitments to everybody? And everybody nods their head and says, oh, absolutely, we really agree, we got to be this way. And we walk out the door and nothing ever changes, because that leader did not deal with it directly and candidly to the person who was the issue, right? What does that do to connection and trust and collaboration on the team, right? Undermines it. It undermines our relationship with the leader, and it undermines our relationship with the person who's the perpetrator, because they never get it. We just hope they get it, and they don't, and everybody walks out of the room, and what was that all about? Why did we get called on the carpet when we know that this person is the issue, right? Have you ever experienced something like that? So, number 3 is a lack of directness and candor. Now, think about how these 3 things work together. You have a lack of specificity on the front end on expectations that some of you mentioned. Right? When we have a lack of specificity, things are not clear, people have a hard time providing direct and candid feedback because the expectations were unclear, and it's going to cause some defensive reaction in the individual when you start talking about it, right? And so we procrastinate on it and we put it off. These 3 communication sins work together in what I call the poor performance perpetuation spiral. I love alliteration. These are what I call the 3 primary communication sins that if you start chipping away and working on these 3, this will, again, accelerate the progress on your project teams and begin to learn the communication power where you can communicate with specificity that leads to clarity, that allows you to be direct and candid with people on all the right things in all the right areas, so you don't procrastinate and you do communicate what I call at the first most appropriate time regarding the immediacy and urgency. Because sometimes in the moment it's not the most appropriate time, right? So we need to find that first most appropriate time. Now you're going to push back at me and say, well, Skip, that's not very specific. And I'm going to tell you, you're right. I wish I had a magic pill that I could give you that would come with a handout that would give you the first most appropriate time and to be able to get all this right. But we just have to be aware and conscious. Too many of us are going through life communicating unconsciously. And so my hope is that this session will help you be a little more conscious of these communication mistakes. Right? And these 3, If you work on these are more global, these are more team-oriented or organizationally oriented that really impact on a more global organizational or team scale. The other 4 are more individual one-on-one relationship stuff that we'll talk about in a minute. So has this been helpful so far? You like this? Am I spot on with these 3? All right. So you are now aware, and awareness is the first step to transformation. So let's go to number 4. Number 4, have you ever been on the other end of this conversation? You've been a victim of this. Boy, that's a really great idea, but. Dave, you did a really great job, but. I was doing this talk in Minneapolis for the Minneapolis PMI at a dinner meeting, dinner keynote, sitting around one of these tables, and the guy who was going to introduce me was having a conversation during dinner, and I overheard the conversation. I get to this point in the presentation, and I say, Julian, I was listening to your conversation you had over dinner. Do you know that you said this, you made this statement? I love my wife, but. We got a good laugh about that. Afterwards, he came up to me on stage, shook my hand, said, Skip, that was a great presentation, but. What does the word but do? It negates everything that came before it, right? It's very disingenuous language, and this will be one of the really great ways you can disconnect with somebody and lose that connection, lose that trust, and start slowly eroding that relationship. The challenge with changing this is something that the speaker yesterday morning, Shima, mentioned about things being simple but not so easy to implement. This but phenomenon, this vernacular that we use, but, is so prevalent, it's really hard to change. So begin becoming aware of this now and just notice how often but comes up in a conversation, especially in the context of trying to give some fluffy, positive things before the other shoe comes. Okay? We've all been there. And think about how it makes you feel when you hear it, because you know something else is coming. So now you're going to try and substitute another couple of words, like however, or although. Those are buts in disguise. So no buts, no howevers, no all those. So I was doing this program in Rochester a few years ago, and a woman raises her hand and says, what do you think of this? This is what my boss says. She says, so he says the fluffy, flowery stuff at the beginning, and then he says, now having said all of that, she said, what do you think of that? I said, that's a long but, right? So we have other euphemisms for this. So be careful about this. Because the idea of giving that positive stuff at the beginning is that you want to build the person up, make them feel good, and then you just pull the rug out from them, chop them down at the knees, and people stop listening when they hear the buts. Right? So what do you do instead? Well, one of the strategies to use is and you'll transition using and. It's a much softer way, and it leaves the conversation open. Has anybody ever been to an improv show? Okay. Improv, which I tried a few years ago, and then I quit after 8 months because I was no good at it. I was killing the audiences. I wasn't very funny. I was killing my teammates when they come up on stage for a scene with me, and I was killing my own self-esteem. So after 8 months, I quit. What I learned, though, was this concept of yes and. Improv is based on this concept of yes and, always building on the ideas that are brought to you. And when you think about collaboration and innovation, that's what we need to be doing. We need to be building on people's ideas. So lose your butts, start using and I guarantee you when you try this, you're going to have to be a much more conscious communicator, because what you typically would say after the but has to be slightly different when you use and as a transition. Uh-oh, what's happening? So this is called, I guess you want the phrase for this is called a lack of respectful rebuttals. Lack of respectful rebuttals. And today is the first day in the communication gymnasium where we're going to start losing our butts. All right? So just, again, become aware of this. Start counting your butts. Notice how often but shows up. Number 5, lack of desirable behaviors. This is a tricky one. Parents in the room? How many parents? Young children. Okay. You live in this world. This is where you're telling people to not do something. Stop doing that. Don't do that. No, don't do that. No, don't, stop, that type of language. And we don't give them an alternative behavior that we want. So we're focusing on the undesirable behaviors. This is focusing on the desirable behaviors, what we want. Most of us don't go there. We focus on all the stuff we don't want to do, or we don't want the other person to do. So we want to focus on the desirable behaviors. Okay? Why do we keep getting the behaviors we don't want that we keep asking for people to stop doing? You ever thought about that? One of the reasons is because your mind does not process that negative command. It focuses on the subject of the sentence. So, stop coming late to meetings, our mind hears, come late to meetings. Don't miss the deadline on Friday. Your mind processes, miss the deadline on Friday. It doesn't process the negative command. It focuses on the subject of the sentence. Right? So we need to give people the alternative. I was doing this, my full communication power training with a local CPA firm in my area. About 25 people were going through the program. This was people that were grooming to be partner. And a young lady raised her hand and says, now, just a few weeks ago, I went to ask my partner a question, and he said this to me. He said, stop asking me the same questions over and over. I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I kind of got upset, and I walked out of his office, and I went to ask the question of somebody else. And so I went to the partner, and I said, when you did this, what was the intent? Well, he said the intent was that she was not assimilating the answers I'm giving her to the questions when she comes asking me, and I want her to assimilate the questions, apply it, and then come back and ask me higher level questions so I see that she's learning, and she wasn't doing that. Well, that's not what you got. What you got was somebody who now is upset to come see you and is going around you to get her answers. And so we had to have a little conversation between the three of us, and I had to coach the partner how to communicate more effectively with her. Okay, because he didn't give her the alternative, he just said, stop asking me the same questions. And so we do this a lot, especially if you're talking to children, and this works with kids. Focus on the desirable behavior that you want instead. You can use the no, the don't stop about explaining the behavior you don't want. You need to also talk about the alternative. Okay, does this make sense? Yes? Okay, thank you. That's where you're supposed to participate. All right, would you like an experiential example of how your mind works in this regard? Okay, good answer. So, if you're willing to play along with me for just 60, maybe 30 seconds for a little closed-eye guided imagery mind game. Close your eyes. Lower your gaze. In your mind, do not create an image of a pink elephant. Do not create an image of a pink elephant in your mind. Stop seeing that pink elephant. No pink elephants. Okay, open your eyes. Come back in the room. Raise your hand if you saw a pink elephant in your mind. Why? I told you not to. You lose. I lose. Now, because you are peak performing project managers, who are all the PMPs in the room? Beautiful. PMPs. Awesome. You are peak performing project management professionals. You probably changed your image to something else, didn't you? What did you change your image to? What's that? A latte? Cool. All right, we know where your mind is. Cool. What else? A car. Okay. So you shifted to something else. How many, raise your hand if you created the image of a green giraffe? Any green giraffes? No. Seriously?
It was yellow, but...
Sorry, yellow doesn't count. Green. We lose. We all lose because I was non-specific, right? This is a subset of lack of specificity. Right? So we're setting people up to lose. I can't leave you like this because you'll be really upset with me, so let's play the game one more time and I'll set you up to win. Close your eyes. Lower your gaze. And in your mind's eye now, create an image of a yellow penguin. Not just one singular yellow penguin, but a flock of yellow penguins. And these yellow penguins are slipping and sliding and playing on an iceberg. Create that image of yellow penguins slipping and sliding, playing on an iceberg. Lock it in. Open your eyes, come back in the room. Who saw yellow penguins? Congratulations, we win. That's the way it works. Okay? Tell people what you want, not what you don't want. Number 6. This is called a lack of appropriate tone and body language. So back in my early days in baseball, I had a friend named Rick. Good friend of mine, still a friend of mine to this day. He used to come and pick me up for lunch about every 2 or 3 months. Comes to the office this one day, and we had just hired a few weeks earlier a new receptionist. Her name was Allison. I was on the phone when Rick came to pick me up for lunch, and so they started getting to know each other. They had not met yet. I hang up the phone, I start walking up the hallway, and they are talking up a blue street. I get to the corner of the reception area, and they go silent. Who do you think they're talking about? So I say, Allison, what happened? You were talking up a blue streak. I'm walking up here, and then I hear total silence. What were you guys talking about? Oh, she said, oh, nothing. It's no big deal. No, I said, you're probably talking about me. What were you talking about? So she says, well, your friend Rick here says that he asked me if I had gotten your look yet. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, your buddy Rick says that when you don't like something that somebody has said or done, you just glare at them. To which I then, and my buddy Rick starts jumping up and down and saying, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I had a look. Who knew? I was doing this program for a big employer in New York State, working with their vice presidents of the company. Vice president of marketing said, just 2 weeks ago, 3 of my direct reports came to me and confronted me. And they said, every time we bring you a problem or an issue to deal with, you sigh. And it makes us feel like you're upset with us. And she said that was such great feedback. She appreciated it because it was a habit that she had gotten into. She was not aware of it, and it was creating a disconnect with her people. What are the inappropriate body language and sort of the language tone that you engage in that you may not even know? Or what's the inappropriate tone and body language you've experienced in the work environment between your people? How inappropriate is it? When is it inappropriate? And how does it manifest? Who are the eye rollers? Any eye rollers? Yeah, okay. Sure your folks love that.
When you're talking, people are still busy with their phone.
Oh, you're way ahead of me. You're way ahead of me. Hold on, Davey. We're coming. We're getting to that one. All right. So, inappropriate tone and body language. What are your little tics and stuff that get in the way of that connection with people? Begin to think about it and notice it in others. And this is where the directness and candor comes in. Just like the 3 direct reports from this vice president, they had to have the trust in the relationship to go confront that issue. Can you have a trusting conversation with somebody, tell them this is getting in the way of the relationships on our team? All right? Something to think about. You need to confront these issues. That's number 6. Number 7 is what we're talking about. In this day and age, we call it a lack of focused attention. The smartphones, right? Everybody's texting and tweeting and sending emails while you're having a conversation. This is about multitasking, except there is no such thing as multitasking. You realize that, right? You've seen probably the research on multitasking. You can't multitask when you're having a conversation with another human being. Have you ever been in a conversation or thought you were in a conversation with somebody and they were multitasking? Right? How does that make you feel? Does that build value and trust? Or is that disconnect? Right? Would you agree that you're both the victim and the perpetrator of this? Right? For all of these, we're both the victim and the perpetrator of this. So we need to build better communication habits. So how many of you would like to have people give you greater focused attention when you're talking? Anybody? Absolutely. So here's 2 tips for you. 1, the reason people are not listening to you or they're distracted and not giving you focused attention is because you're not commanding their attention. There's a lot of stuff you could be thinking about right now. Everybody's got their smartphones, people got their laptops out. Hopefully you're taking notes, or maybe you've got work to do and people have to get in touch with you. That's okay. That's the power of the smartphone. That's great. My job on this stage is to command your attention by speaking about something that is of interest to you in a way that is somewhat engaging and interactive. Have I been able to do that so far this morning for the most part? Thank you. You can do this too. When you communicate with people, you have to focus on what's important to them and why it's important to them. We talked about this in the change program yesterday. You've heard the whole thing about with them, what's in it for me, right? We have to talk to that. That will get people's attention, right? Most of us are talking about stuff that's important to us. They don't care. So you have to command people's attention in two ways. One, with speaking about things that are important to them, and in an engaging way. Using their, common language, not jargon that people don't understand. Right? And engaging. Use some voice inflection, some body language that works, right? That draws people in. Most people don't communicate that way. It's just, they just drone on. How many people know people just drone on, right? That's number one. Command people's attention. Commit to commanding people's attention. Be that type of power communicator. Second is demanding people's attention. Now, by demanding people's attention, I don't mean you go up to them and you grab them by the collar and say, listen to me. That's not going to work very well. That would be inappropriate tone and body language. Would you agree? By demand, I just mean ask for it. Do you or have you ever had somebody be a hoverer? You know the drive-bys that just come by your office, cubicle, or whatever, and they just kind of... They just wait for you to pick your head up, and then what do? They start going in with their stuff, right? Have you ever done that? Probably. So in those situations, you are interrupting that individual. Be a little respectful. Hey, do you have a few minutes right now to talk about something? Or should we schedule a more appropriate time? Right? In meetings, wouldn't you love people to have more focused attention in meetings? Set the standard and the expectation. I need your focused attention for the next 30 minutes, 45 minutes, and here's why. Because you're commanding their attention. Right? We're not doing this stuff. We're not demanding people's attention by just simply asking for it. And if you ask for it and you give them the right reason, you can do it. And if you promise them a tech break in 30 or 45 minutes, they'll be okay. Right? So, would you agree that you can be better at commanding people's attention and demanding people's attention? Again, do this, you'll add another 10% or 20% to your effectiveness in people paying attention. Okay? So those are the 7. Lack of focused attention, lack of appropriate tone and body language, lack of desirable behaviors, lack of respectful rebuttals was secondary, and then lack of directness and candor, lack of immediacy, urgency and promptness, and lack of specificity. Do you notice some common themes that are happening in your world regarding communication on your project teams and in your life? These are the things that you need to start cleaning up. So what do? Where to start? Pick 2. Simply pick 2. At your tables. You've been taking notes. You've been a great audience listening to me, taking this on. I trust this has been a valuable presentation for you, and you're taking something away from this. All right? You have a handout. Hopefully you've been taking notes on this. So, on the second page or the back page of the handout is an area where you can write down some takeaways and some commitments. So what I want you to do now, the person you talked to at the beginning of this session, have a conversation, another 1-minute quick conversation about the 2 communication sins you're going to start working on when you leave this room. Okay? 1 minute, 2 communication sins to start working on when you leave this room. You have 1 minute, go. Mic runners, get ready. All right, 15 seconds. All right, mic runners, get ready. Here we go. All right, let's bring it back. If you can hear my voice, clap once. All right. So, who is willing to make a public commitment on the 2 communication sins they're going to start working on when they leave here? Raise your hand. We have some mic runners. Okay, David, right here. Palmer, right back that table there.
Hi. One of the things that I really am going to focus on is my appropriate tone and body language. I wear my emotions on my sleeve, which kills my team. The other thing is we talked about is really focusing on the appropriate behaviors. In the world of project management, it feels like you're always putting out fires.
Yes.
And so you focus on those 2 bad things when there was 100 good things. So trying to focus on those good things.
Absolutely. Good job. Give him a hand. Thank you. Palmer. Is somebody back at one of your tables there, I thought? Somebody on this side? Up here.
So one of those things as I always do, and finally somebody told me the team is I roll my eyes a lot.
Roll, eye roller.
So that's something I've stopped doing since then. So that's one thing I want to work on. And then the other one is the but. To change the way to say, to bring like good things and then talk about the things we improve. So that's one thing.
Outstanding. Congratulations. Give me a hand. Thank you. Somebody else on this side. Young lady right here. Do one more on this side, so somebody get ready.
Mine is probably more of a question. When you talk about specificity, sometimes it's hard to place a deadline on someone when you don't truly understand all of their commitments that they have.
Yes.
So as a project manager, you want to keep moving the ball forward, but
Yes.
you also don't want to be like, give it to me by tomorrow, but you don't really need it tomorrow.
Right.
Ask them to set their own commitment and deadline for
Yeah. Yeah, and that, it's a negotiation. Hey, I would really like to have this by then. Can you do it? I understand you have other priorities. Let's talk about it. Just having the conversation to gain clarity between the 2 of you. Absolutely. That stuff's not happening either because we just have people making demands on us, right? We have to be respectful. One more over here.
I also wanted to work on the lack of specificity and just be really clear and concise in what I'm asking for,
Yep.
when it might be due, and what I need from someone.
Great. Thank you. All right. Good job. Give her a hand. Thank you. Yeah, lack of specificity is good. Oh, one other caveat with the lack of specificity. More words do not necessarily equal more specificity. Right? You have a lot of people that tell the whole backstory, right? All right, so congratulations on that. And I'm really glad that you took some value out of this. So one final little point of things. I want to give you some for gifts for being such a great audience. A couple of things here. And then we'll wrap this up because we're coming to the top of the 9th inning. And we're going to wrap this up in just a few moments. And I talk about the top of the 9th inning because in baseball, what does the top of the 9th inning represent? If the game's going to end in the top of the 9th inning, what does that mean? Home team wins. So we're going to end this in the top of the 9th inning because this home team for the Portland PMI Professional Development Day has put on a winning event, haven't they? Give them a hand. So we're going to wrap this up in the top of the night because this team is definitely put on a winning event. So 3 free gifts on your handout. There's a feedback form. I'd love to get your feedback, your takeaways from this. Also, if you have a question you'd like to ask that we can't do now, write it down. I promise within 2 weeks you will get a response either by phone or email with me answering your specific communication question. If you want free gifts, if you want to double your communication power in the next 12 months, I invite you to join my community. You can get the white paper that has a lot more tips and tools and techniques on the 7 communication sins and the skills you need. The second thing, because of all the talking I do with project management, I've accumulated 31 frequently asked project management questions on communication that I put together in a little ebook. And then if you want to really build your communication power over the next 12 months, I have this thing called the 52 Power Word Series. You'll get 1 power word a week for 12 months. The caveat here is it's not going to improve your vocabulary. This is common everyday words that we're not using more powerfully enough, and it'll help trigger some ways that you can be a more powerful communicator. The other thing I'm going to offer is a follow-up accountability webinar on November 1st, 12 noon Pacific time. I'm catering it to your time period. The East Coast folks, my other PMI talks will get it on their time, obviously. Accountability webinar. I want you to come to the webinar. We'll do a whole other piece of content around something called the 3 levels of communication influence, and we'll do a check-in with how you're doing with your communication skills that you've committed to. How's that sound? All right? So, but I need your contact information to send you the invitation and the sign-in stuff for the webinar. And there's also, I don't have a book, but I have a product I just came out with called the 3 Levels of Communication Influence, and it's for sale on a 50% discount at this conference. So you can check on that if you want to go even deeper with me. So let's wrap this up and bring in the closer and get out of here with a winning event. So you heard that my job was to put butts in seats, keep the beer cold, and keep the bathrooms clean. How many were you in my change session yesterday? And you came back. Wow, that's good. Thank you for coming back. Wasn't too bad then. You heard that I was on the grounds crew and the tarp crew when it rained as a CEO of a minor league baseball team. We have to do it all. We have to pitch in doing a lot of different things. And one day I was literally pitching in. Our field manager, Butch, came up to me, up to the front office. And managers never come up to the front office unless there's a big issue. It's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he comes up and he says, Skip, we got a problem. Bobby, our pitching coach, hurt his arm yesterday. We need somebody else to help throw batting practice. I said, Butch, it's kind of late. I don't know if I can call around and get anybody here. He says, that's okay. You can do it. I said, Butch, I can't do it. I'm a high school baseball dropout. I hit 220 in high school. I can't play with you guys. He said, no, you're an athlete. You play tennis. You play softball. You can do this. Just come down to the clubhouse. In 20 minutes, we'll get you all dressed up. So I go to the clubhouse. I put the uniform on. Next thing I know, I'm standing 55 feet in front of home plate behind this L screen to protect the pitchers for batting practice. And have you ever agreed to something and then said, oh my, what did I just get myself into? I'm looking down towards home plate to this batter in the batter's box. And have you ever, in that situation, have you ever been intimidated by a situation and you tried to overcompensate? So I'm overcompensating. I figure I got to really bring it. I have no business being on the field with these guys. So I wind up like it's the bottom of the 9th of the World Series, and I throw the ball as fast as I can. And to my surprise, the guy swings and misses. So I wind up again. Throw as fast as I can. Swing and a miss, strike 2. I'm building a little confidence here. Any scouts around? So I wind up again and throw as fast as I can. Swing and a miss, strike 3. If this had been a ball game, I'd have my first strikeout. I'm starting to think, maybe I have a future here. The lunch and keynote yesterday, we were talking about, well, this is the thing that you were meant to do. Maybe I'm starting to think, I was meant to do this. They can't hit me. I'm throwing the ball too fast. As soon as that thought passes, I hear a voice over my right shoulder. It's the guy who just hit before, and they practice base running after they come out of the cage, and he's at second base doing his base running thing, and I hear him yell into his teammate, Steve, you have to wait on it. It's coming in slow. It's coming in slow. It's coming in slow. I'll show you coming in slow. So I charge back behind that L screen to throw, and I hear another voice from the dugout, and it's Butch, the manager. And Butch says, Skip, hold on, Skip. Kevin's right. You're trying to throw the ball too hard. Your arm speed's coming around too fast, but the ball's coming out slow. It's messing up the batter's timing. He says, just throw the ball normal and naturally. Stop trying to be Nolan Ryan. You know who Nolan Ryan is? The greatest strikeout pitcher in the history of baseball? So after that, I just throw the ball in. That ball may have gone in slow. It went out fast, 350 feet over the fence. Every ball after that, I'm throwing them in, and they're spraying the ball all over the field. And I realized something in that moment. Have you ever thought you were doing something right and you got some feedback that you need to make an adjustment? So I realized in that moment, the job of a batting practice pitcher is not to strike out the batters. The job of a batting practice pitcher is to pitch it so that it connects, so the batters get warmed up for the game, so they build confidence for the game. And just like a batting practice pitcher, as a project manager, when you communicate, your job is to pitch it so that it connects, so that you build trust with your project team members. So remember that. Just as the batting practice pitcher is supposed to pitch it so that it connects, right? Your job as a communicator is to pitch your communication so that it connects. I trust this morning's session has given you some tips, tools, and techniques, and I fulfilled my promise to help you pitch your communication as a project management professional so that next time you connect and build trust. Thank you very much.